Hello, everyone. This is Drew Stegall, and today we are going to go over listening and audience analysis. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the schedule coming up. Then I'm going to go over audience analysis. And finally, I'm going to go over listening. So first, this upcoming Monday, you are going to have your final persuasion speech done. Next Thursday will be the last video lecture over a topic. Okay, there's technically two more video lectures. That's next Thursday, and then on the Monday afterwards, or it's actually the next Tuesday afterwards, I will do a final recap for your exam. Okay, and you're gonna want to watch that so you get to know what's going to be on the exam, how to study for it before you take it, and then we're about done here. So this is the second to last video lecture here. So let's get started with some audience analysis. So I chose to use this to couple with listening. So communication is a two-way street. You have the sender of the message, and then you have the receiver of the message, okay? And you are going to be going back and forth between the sender and the receiver of messages throughout your entire life. In fact, when you're giving a speech, you need to also be a receiver of messages. So if people are checking their watches, yawning, that probably means you need to wrap up your speech. If people are leaning in, giving you a lot of eye contact, that's sending you the message that they are really engaged with your speech. So today I'm going to tell you guys about how to listen to the messages your audience is sending, but also how to be a better listener in general. So as a speaker, you need to be focused on the audience. This is called audience centeredness, because you can go in front of a group of people and you could talk about yourself and you could talk about things that you know really well. You could use language that you know really well, phrases that you've done, stories and inside jokes that you've been a part of. And I think I've actually written this on a couple notes. It's like, oh, I didn't understand that inside joke because I wasn't there. So that's called being speaker-centered. If you're thinking about yourself and how funny this is for you or how good this is for you, that's not going to be a good speech. A good speech is very audience-centered. Okay, so if you are talking to your high school football team or sports team, basketball, FFA, one of those teams, you're going to be able to share inside jokes because you don't have people from the outside. But if you are talking to a big group of people and you share an inside joke, they're not going to get that. It's going to be awkward. You're like, oh, there's a couple people laughing, but I don't understand that. So you want to be sure that in your speaking, you're not focused on yourself. You're focusing on how you can best deliver the message to your audience, and that's called audience centeredness. Okay, this is a big term. This is called egocentrism. This is a vocabulary word, and you should write it down. It could be on your final exam. So egocentrism is Latin. We're going to break it down. Ego meaning self, and then centrism sounds like centered, so it's self-centeredism. Okay, so egocentrism is if you're thinking mostly about yourself. So babies is the epitome of egocentrists because the world literally revolves around them at that age, right? So if they're crying, they assume you can hear them 3 rooms away. If they can't see you, you don't exist, right? That's why peekaboo is so fun is you blip out of existence and you come back in because they can't see you and the universe revolves around them at that stage in life. So as we grow older, we slowly realize, hey, I am not the center of everything. And that is really hard in speaking because a lot of times we try to talk as if we're talking to a bunch of ourselves. We're trying to deliver a message as if we're just talking straight to ourselves because we know how we communicate. We can understand what we're meaning, but other people don't always know what we're meaning. I find that in myself, I have to say, oh, that's not what I meant. And then they'd say, oh, well, this is what you said. And I didn't understand that. So there's some miscommunication whenever I switch and go into egocentrism. Okay. So you need to be audience centered and not ego centered. Okay. Some important things you need to know about audience analysis is demographics. So we have different genres of music, like there's hip hop, there's rap, there's dance music, there's electronica, there's country, western. So think about demographics as if they're genres of people. So here's a list of demographics. Now, these aren't all the demographics available, but these are just the standard. So there's age. How old are you? And along with age is generation. So right now in America, we have just a couple generations still alive. We have the greatest generation. So they were alive during World War II. So think of your maybe great grandparents. I still have just a couple of those alive from that greatest generation. And then after that is the baby boomers. Okay, so that is your grandparents. The baby boomers, they were after World War II, everyone came around and they made lots of babies. And that's why for the people in that time period, they're called the baby boomers. Next is Generation X. And there wasn't really anything going on that was big, so they just said, oh, they're Generation X. We don't even know what to call them. Next are the millennials. That's the generation I'm a part of. And that is the turn of the millennium. One of the key characteristics of being a millennial is remembering 9/11. I remember that as a kid. I remember seeing it on TV. And I remember just a week or two later, I went to a bank and there was a kid and he said, yeah, my dad was in one of those buildings. He was working there, but he didn't work that day. And so that's a big thing is if you're a millennial, you remember 9/11. You guys are Gen Z. They also call you Zoomers. I think that name's going to stick. There hasn't been a for sure name for you guys just yet, but I believe it's going to be Zoomers because Generation Z, you had to use Zoom during the pandemic, and you guys are quick. You need things snappy. Your social media is very fast. Your internet's fast. Your technology's fast. Your cars are fast. So I think Zoomer's going to stick. And we have the next generation is my daughter's generation, and they're calling it Generation Alpha. Okay, and here's why generations are important. Every generation has different values and beliefs. We talked about that in persuasion. So World War II, their value and belief was they got home from the war, and they had lots of kids because they really wanted lots of family. So they gave a lot of family attention to their kids in the baby boomer generation. Now, growing up, the baby boomers, they had a lot of fun. Because the world was more around them, they had a lot of fun. It was one of the best times economically after the war. This is also the time of the hippies. So if you know some old people, you might know a couple people who celebrated the 70s. Then Generation X, so the baby boomers, this is the generation that they got to go play outside. I saw on TikTok and YouTube that there were actually several advertisements, PSA's personal public service announcement asking the baby boomers who are raising the Gen Xers is like, have you hugged your kid today? Or, hey, it is 10 o'clock. Do you know where your kid is? It's because they let them run loose. There's a lot of disconnect between the baby boomers and their kids, the Gen Xers. And leads to my generation. We are the millennial generation. We know the internet. And so if you notice, a lot of millennials really know the internet and baby boomers don't, and they need a lot of help. So those are some important things about age. So whenever you are looking at your audience, you need to know, okay, what is the demographic here? It could be older. So in churches, statistically, it is baby boomers and Gen X's right now. And so I'm not going to use TikTok slang. I'm not going to make a lot of jokes that my generation gets. I think my generation, the millennials, we have a lot of memes. I think memes have kind of faded out with you guys, but you guys have TikTok trends and a lot of inside jokes that are within TikTok and your social media and your friends group. And that's why it's very important to realize the age of your audience. That's really a big one. That's why it's up here at the top. That's why I spoke a lot about it, is because age plays a very important factor in your audience analysis. So as I get older, I'm not going to be as trending with the slang. And so you guys are lucky, because if you use some of that slang, I'm not going to catch it, because I won't have to be like, oh, I have no idea what that means. But my dad, he actually said Netflix and chill on a Sunday service because he thought that meant hang out. And the the millennials in the audience and the Gen Zers in the audience were cracking up. It was hilarious, and everyone else was like really confused. And then someone told him, "But that's important. You need to realize what the slang you're using, what the inside jokes you're using, what references you're using, because it matters when talking to different age groups. You need to be able to speak in a way that they understand, not in how you normally speak." So, gender is really important. You need to realize what kind of audience you're speaking to. Is it mostly male oriented, or is it mostly female oriented? Is there a good mix? Um, as we develop, it could be more of a, yeah, let's just stick with that. So with gender, it could be more of a male centered space or a female centered space. And you're going to have to change how you talk. Please reflect back on my gender communication. One of the things is that men have a desire to get things done and solve a problem. And so their speeches tend to be shorter. They have a shorter attention span. That's a tendency. Females have a tendency to want to build relationships. So they may go a little longer in their speaks. They might have an opportunity for more questions. And that's just a tendency. That's not the norm. Or that's not set in stone, but it is a tendency. Next is racial, ethnic, and cultural. So could be white, African American, Hispanic. This is very important. You need to realize what's the demographic of your audience, because they might hear things a certain way. Here's an example. So my dad went to El Salvador, and he actually had to speak to a translator. And he said, I will heat, or the spirit of the God will heat you. He will heat you up, and that will cause you to be on fire for him. But he wasn't aware that they discipline their kids a little harsher than they do in the United States. And the translator thought God was going to hit them. And so he was translating, God will hit you. He will hit you until you get right. And that was not the case. So you need to realize just the different demographics. And culturally, this is huge. In the Texas Panhandle, you need to know who you're talking to, but you need to know the Texas culture. One of that is we really love Texas. So if you come up and say that Texas has a lot of problems, you might get tuned out. I talk about Beto O'Rourke. He came up. He was really good whenever he spoke in Dalhart, because he told us what we wanted to hear. Basically, he's like, yeah, Dalhart's pretty good, but there's just a couple things we got to change. And it was making it small. But if you watch his YouTube videos, he makes it sound like Texas is crumbling and falling apart, and it couldn't be saved unless we vote in Beto. So he understood the culture of Dalhart, Texas, by saying, yeah, Texas is good, we're number one, but we need a couple of changes. But as a lot of his other videos, it's like, hey, we are falling apart, we are being failed, people are dying, you gotta change Texas altogether. So you need to understand the culture, and we have a very proud culture up here, especially in the Texas Panhandle. Background, just general background. This could be broken up into several things. So a youth group is a background. It's like, oh, I have a youth group background, or it could be a skater background, which also kind of fits into cultural. So this is important. There's my wife. She has known a lot of people in Alcoholics Anonymous. She's not a part of the program, but she's had a lot of people in her life that's had to go to it. And if you're speaking at an AA meeting, you need to be aware of jokes you say or analogies you say, because you don't want to trigger anything that might cause them to stumble. So you need to realize what the background of your group is. This is very important, because we've had people come to our church who talked about sex trafficking, and people who've come talking about healthcare rights. So you need to know the background and what the values of that background is, especially if you become a specialized speaker. You're going to be talking to people with very specific backgrounds. So you're working at a job, and your job is one of the dairies around here, right? You need to realize, okay, their background is the dairy, so they're going to have a lot of inside jokes with the dairy. Next is religion. Oh, and so this background information also goes into group membership. You're just a part of a group, and you need to know what group you're talking to. Next, religion is finally, there's lots of religions out there. They have different beliefs. Whenever I went to Kyrgyzstan, I was speaking to Christians, but they came from a Muslim background, and they still had some values of the Muslim faith, such as men are the head of the household. They actually celebrate a men's day. They have a women's day, but they value the sacredity of religion more so than we do in the United States. And so whenever it's time to pray, they be sure, like, no hats allowed in the sanctuary. We still see some of this in churches today, but it's gotten a lot more lax. So they come from this Muslim background. So faith and religion is a huge part of how they communicate, how they speak. And you need to understand that whenever you speak to people in foreign countries, because a lot of them have very strong religious beliefs. And all this goes to say is that you need to know the demographics of your audience before speaking to them. And you're going to alter your speech to communicate the best message to them. So for me, a speech to my youth group is going to be completely different than a speech and a sermon going to the main adults, right? So be aware of all these key factors: age, gender, racial, ethnic, cultural, background, religion, and group membership. Next, you need to be aware of the situation, size, and setting. So the situation, is it a serious situation? Are you speaking at a comedy club? Are you giving a speech at at a funeral or a wedding? Because the situation matters. Is it going to be a lighthearted situation, or is it going to be serious? Is it going to be serious tone, or are you going to have a lot of inflections in your speech? Next is size. I talk to you guys differently in a classroom setting because there's less than 10 of us versus how I would in a 30 plus class size. There will be a lot more discussion. I think you've seen it's a little more informal, which means we have more of a conversation, a little bit of back and forth. Whereas if it gets bigger, it becomes more of me talking and you just listening. So here's how you know what the situation is, what the demographic is. You need to ask the event coordinator, or if you've been to a place, so let's say you're at a youth group, you're going to look around the youth group and like, okay, I know I'm going to speak here in a little bit. I know that this is who I'm going to speak to. We have a cowboy church here in Dalhart, Texas, and they just rotate the pastors through and through. And so what I did before I spoke is I went there and I looked at the demographic. I realized, wow, these are mostly greatest generation, if not a little bit of baby boomers, but no Generation X, no millennials, no Zoomers. But that was the situation, and it was a serious topic because it was a cowboy church. So a couple jokes here and there, but really more serious tone. So that was the situation, that was the size. And so I altered my sermon to fit them. And their size was probably 40, 50 people. It wasn't a one-on-one conversation. It wasn't a group of 10 conversation. It was a big group. And so that really changes how you speak, because you're not going to have as much of a back and forth. You're going to be mostly talking to the audience, and you need to be loud enough where the person in the back can hear you. Maybe you need to bring in sound equipment. I've had lots of time where I had to bring in my own sound equipment to a wedding to make sure that everything was heard. Okay, next is the setting. Where are you speaking? Is it a small room? Is it a big room? Is it outside? Where are you speaking? I think the library that we're speaking in now is one of the worst places to speak because there's carpet on the walls and it's a library, and naturally you have an inclination to speak quietly. And that's hard because there's no reason to be quiet. We have the door shut, but the carpet absorbs the sound, so you sound quiet, and it's so hard. So the setting is you need to amp it up. You need to speak a little louder. And that's the setting. Are you on a Zoom call like this? Are you speaking face to face on a Zoom call? You need to check the microphone before you speak. You need to make sure it works and does its job before you go live. So just be aware of the setting. So if it's outdoor, you're going to have to speak louder. You're going to have to really speak up. We call this the volume. And you're not going to yell, but you're going to just speak louder. Let's see, setting. So small room, you're going to not speak as loud, but you need to still make sure that people in the audience can hear you. And sometimes you see this quite a bit. You see a speaker say, hey, can everyone hear me? Can you hear me in the back? And then the audience gives like, yeah or no. And then the sound guy or you can adjust to be louder. So the sound guy could turn your microphone up, but if not, you might need to speak a little louder. That's why it's very important to understand this setting, because if you're just talking at what makes you comfortable, it's going to be just a normal talking, and you might not be heard by even the front row. So when you are speaking, you need to have that audience centeredness and understand the situation, size, and setting. Okay. And this is just the situation. What's your topic? You need to know your topic. You need to know, as the people that you're speaking to, are they mostly on board with the topic, or are they going to be mostly against? Back to the Beto coming to the Dalhart, Texas, to the taqueria. He knew that, hey, we probably weren't going to like a lot of stuff he was saying, so he chose to do the good things that we would like about him. A disposition toward the speaker. Not a lot of people in Dalhart, Texas vote Democrat or in text line. The majority up here right now is Republican, and so disposition toward the speaker. So you might have to give a speech where you're like, hey, these guys might not like what I have to say, but you're going to try anyway, especially if you're going for a position of power. If you're doing political positions, even if you're trying to get voted into a club or organization to be a president of something, you're going to know that not everyone's on your side. So you're going to have to adjust your speech to be kinder. You're not going to be attacking the other person, because that will definitely get you on the wrong side of things. So the topic, speaker, and occasion, same thing, situation. Where are you at? What are you speaking about? It matters if it's a serious conversation, a bad conversation, a funeral or a wedding or a comedy club night. It's just, what are you talking about, and how is the audience going to react in that situation? Okay, here's a good example. So during XIT weekend, there's always the melodrama. I was part of the melodrama. And on Friday night, it was always the rowdiest, because that's when everyone was drinking a lot more. And so we had to prepare for extra pauses, because the laughs would always be bigger and better. The clapping would be more, the booing for the villain would be more. And so we had to pause a lot more. So we actually had an hour and 15-minute program come out to be 2 hours long, because of everyone, whoa, just acting rowdy. And so we had to prepare for that. And it happens the same every single year. Friday night's the rowdy group. And so we have to prepare for the rowdy bunch and pause a lot more and not speak over them cheering us on. Otherwise, they're not going to hear what we're saying. Okay, finally, before I wrap this up, we need to talk about listening and hearing, being a good listener. Okay, so this is vocabulary words. I need you guys to write this down. There is a difference between listening and hearing. Hearing is the physical function of the ear. Hearing is when sound waves in the air hit the bone in your ear, which causes vibration, and then your brain recognizes it. Okay, that's hearing, is the physical function of the ear. Listening is understanding the message that you are receiving. Okay, listening is understanding the message that you're receiving, because it is possible to be a good listener even if you're deaf. You can read lips, you can see the sign language, but listening is paying attention to the message and comprehending it. Listening is comprehension of the message. Okay. Hearing, we hear stuff all the time. Most of the time it's light bulbs. They're the worst. They make a zzz, and most of the time you can't hear it, but as a video recorder, I video it and I'm like, wow, this is so good. And I put on the computer and I can't hear anything. I just hear zzz, or an air conditioner, or you guys might not have this as much of a problem in text line, but in Dalhart, we have the trains bad. And I live right next to the train track, so I hear them cranking and honking their horn and driving through town all the time. And so our brain does this funny thing where if we hear something enough, we start to tune it out. So that's air conditioners, train tracks, we start to tune it out, but we are actively hearing it all the time. But we're not listening. So sometimes if you have to hear a teacher every single day, or if your parents talk to you every single day or nag you every single day, you might start to switch them from listening to what they're actually saying to just hearing, where you are there while the vibration hits your ear, but you do not comprehend the message that they are sending. And so as a communicator, you need to do both. You need to be able to listen to what's important. You need to not just be a good speaker, but you need to be a good listener, because all of the best communicators I've seen know how to be a good listener and what it takes to listen to another speaker, to a person in need. I want you guys just kind of in your head, think about someone who is a good listener in your life. There's lots of people. A listener could be, most of the time, from what I've seen, is moms and grandmas. That's the majority, is moms and grandmas, maybe an aunt or sister. But for the most part, I've seen that the best listeners happen to be females. And that's because, again, females have a tendency to have relationships, to be relational, whereas men hear the part they need and then tune out. This is what I struggle with the most. This has been studied that men hear the important bits and then tune out repeated conversations. So in your listening, I want you guys to really listen to this other group, to the rest of these persuasive speeches, and be a good listener. So being a good listener also includes eye contact. It shows that you're listening. It's not distracting. Being a good listener means clearing out distractions in your life. So the noise. So if you know you're going to have to listen to a speech or a lecture, and you're like, oh, I haven't eaten all day, I don't want to eat, you might need to get some food, because then you're going to sit the whole time, you're going to have that noise saying, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. Or it could be someone's trying to talk to you, like whispering, like, hey, did you see that on Twitter? And that's a distraction. Good listeners get rid of distractions. They make good eye contact. And that's keys to being a good listener. One of the best listeners, one in my life, was my grandma. And what made her such a good listener was that whenever I was speaking, she never interrupted. She would wait till I finished. And most of the time I was like, man, that's hard, I'm sorry. And she would repeat back what I said. So a good listener, especially in the workplace, repeats back that last bit of information. So if you are writing down a phone number, you're going to repeat it 806, and then they'd repeat it. Or I'm trying to think of another example. It's just like, oh, really? They said that? It's kind of a feedback. That is feedback that helps them realize, hey, you're still engaged, you're listening. And so as a good listener, you need to kind of remind the speakers that you're listening and go like, oh, really? Man, that's cool. But you would need to do something relevant to the topic. Like, oh, she wore that blue dress instead of the red. That's crazy. I don't know. But that's feedback. Again, you need to give some feedback as a listener to help remind your speaker that you are listening or engaged. Or you might say, hey, can you repeat that? I didn't hear that. In smaller settings, speaking settings, if I'm not loud enough, the person in the back might say, hey, we can't hear you. And then I say, oh, I'm sorry. And we turn it up, or I'd increase my speaking volume. But being a good listener is clearing distractions so you hear the message in the best way possible. Okay, so that's it for today for audience analysis and audience and listening. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you on Monday. Bye.